Welcome to the show. I am Whitney Kobrin, and I'm a love coach and owner of Heart Hunters Love Coaching. I help women to love themselves, love their lives, and attract lasting love. And today I have a special guest with me, my friend Megan Hart. Hi, Megan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell us all a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I am an embodiment coach. And so essentially, what that means, and my focus on that is I work with people learning how to trust their emotions, their instincts, their intuition. So we learn to trust ourselves more. So that is really useful in any area of life, but I especially work with people in these big life decisions like which career path to take or staying in a relationship or which relationship is right, having children or not, kind of these big things that people don't want to just go into based on what other people say they should do. So the embodiment, takes us out of our head into just the thinking mode, but down into the body and trusting our instincts.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. And we actually met through a program that was really the foundation was embodiment.
Yeah.
And it's also about love and relationships. And so there's a huge connection, if it wasn't obvious already from what Megan just said, but there's a huge connection between how we relate to other people and how much we relate to ourselves and can trust ourselves. And so today's topic is going to be authenticity in relationships. So we're going to talk a lot about authenticity and embodiment and relationships. So Megan, do you want to tell me a little bit about what you believe authenticity is and how it relates to embodiment?
Yeah, I mean, I think authenticity is like it's like a buzzword right now. It's very, I think a lot of people are really into it, but maybe don't completely understand what it is. And um, essentially, like it's just being really real about who you are, and embodiment is like a vehicle for us to become more real and embodied in ourselves. So and that's important if we want to have genuine relationships, because there's certainly, like everyone knows, like there's certain like surface level relationships we can have even with ourselves, um, but the deeper you go, the more embodied you have to be, in order to authentically relate to someone else on a deeper level. And the same goes, like you can only meet someone else as deeply as they're willing to go. And I also want to say to me, there's not like you're embodied or you're not. It's a spectrum. So, and it changes every day depending on like how open we want to be. Sometimes we don't want to go that deep, and that's okay. So I
Yeah,
think even that is part of authenticity, where it's like, yeah, I don't feel like I don't want to go there right now. But being honest about that.
yeah,
Honesty
yeah,
is a huge part of it too.
yes.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a process, right? It's a process to learn to be more embodied on the spectrum and a process in learning how to be more authentic,
Hmm.
because most of us grow up in and throughout our childhood and our adulthood, we are programmed to act certain way. And we learn to hold back or to put ourselves in a box or to be the way that people want us to be, to look the way that society tells us we need to look, to not show too much emotion because someone will think that you're crazy or they will judge you, to we learn not to cry in front of other people, for example. And all of this disconnects us from who we really are and how we really feel on the inside. And I have a lot of people that come to me because they're single or they're single again, or they're in a relationship and they have anxiety. That's a big one. I get a lot of women that have anxiety. They're nervous, they're anxious, they're not sure what's going on in their relationship or where it's going or how the other person feels about them. And they're still in their head.
Yeah.
You know, going back to what you said in the beginning, they're just thinking, and they're writing lists, and they're, you know, how does he want me to act? And how should I act? And what's he going to say? What's he going to respond to this? And what's the best way to get the right guy that I want? And they don't realize that you're never going to get the answers if you're constantly in your head. And that's where the anxiety comes from.
Yes. Yeah, completely.
So, I mean, I know we can't really get into the practice very much of how they do that, but you know, is there something you can share that might be helpful to people who are listening and saying, wow, you know what, I didn't even realize it, but I'm struggling with this? You know, are there small practices that they could do on their own, or ways?
Yeah, there's, so it's, you know, probably stuff people have already heard, just labeled differently. So what I always start with is just notice how you're feeling. Like, actually just be honest with about how you're feeling. So like, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. And so it's super simple. It's like dumb simple, you know, but it's like, just notice it first. And then don't make it wrong that you feel that way. That's a huge thing. So when we, you know, most of us are trained to, or, you know, programmed to avoid emotions and feelings that we don't want to feel, which is understandable. It's not our preference to feel anxious. No one likes to feel that way. But it's important to acknowledge it and to not ignore it, and to not make it wrong. Because when we do that, when we make it wrong, it actually, this mechanism kicks in where it just persists, right? It's like what you resist persists. I think most people have heard that adage. So we want to just notice how we're feeling, don't make it wrong. And then actually, like, if you can take a moment, if you're in a public setting, it's a little harder if you're not used to this, but you can go into like a bathroom or something and just actually, you know, close your eyes and tune into, like, what does that energy feel like in my body? Like, what does that anxious energy feel like without the stories, you know, because there's going to be all the stories like, oh, he didn't call me back, or, oh, I might not get the promotion, like whatever the stories are. But what does that anxiety actually feel like? Like, get intimate with it. So you want to get intimate with it, which people also are like, what? And then allow that. The next step is to allow that to move through your body. Like, what does anxiety look like or feel like moving through your body? A lot of times it's shaking. So it's like, I had a client yesterday where I prompted her to start shaking for the last couple of weeks when she was feeling that way. And she's like, I feel so much better. Like, I'm not like trying to, like, you know, keep it contained and like, and it's, you know, you let it go and then it dissipates, you know, and sometimes it'll come back, you know. So
Wow.
that's like the most simple thing to do. It seems, I don't know, that is really, really helpful.
And it's so big, because I think it's, even though it's very simple, it can be counterintuitive to people. Because if somebody's feeling anxious and feeling anxiety, they tense up and they hold things in. And when they are saying, I don't want to feel this way, I don't want to feel this way, stop it, stop it, stop it, they're just adding fuel to the fire.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And more stuck.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And you know, the word embodiment, it really does involve your body. And so it's, you know, important that people start to learn to move their body and use their body in ways that are going to help them and not ways that are going to hurt them. Because a lot of the habits that we have learned not only are limiting beliefs that we continue to let come up over and over and over again in our life, like our programming, but in our bodies, we learn certain things.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's things that have helped you in the past.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so that, like, on that point, it's like, even when we're like less embodied, or we're disembodied, or we're feeling a certain way we don't want to feel, like, it's not wrong. Like, there's a reason, there's a very good reason we learned that. And it may continue to happen at some points. Like, if I'm super stressed out, I go into freeze mode. That's just my body's, and I don't have control over that. I don't. I do have control more so now over my awareness of it. Like, I can be aware, oh, these are the signals that I've learned through this work, that I'm in freeze mode in my life right now. Okay, what can I do to take care of myself so I can get back into like a flow again?
Yeah. And, speaking of flow, one of the practices that I know that we both do is the feminine flow practice, which to me, it's sort of like where meditation meets dance.
Yes.
Where we put music on and we allow our bodies to lead and flow. And I'll tell you a little story. I grew up dancing. I danced all different styles and different types, and all different types of choreography. And I went from being sort of a flailing, loose person to really having a good structure, and linear movement was very natural to me. I could learn a choreographed dance very quickly. I could follow along in yoga and all these things. And I think a lot of people have a barrier to embodiment because they think they need that. They think, well, I don't have a background in that. And I'll tell you, my personal experience was that my background and my knowledge and my dance experience actually sort of held me back.
Yeah, I believe that. Because I've worked with some other people who have been professional dancers, and and I can't say because I'm not in anyone else's body, obviously, but from what I experience working with them, is they do have a harder time because they think they're so trained for it to look a certain way, or for it to be a performance, right?
Yes.
It's not a performance. It's like, it can look fucking weird, Sorry, I don't know if I excuse my language.
You're right. It was weird. And when your body becomes trained, if you've been alive for a few decades, your body has become a certain way. It holds itself in a certain way. And as a dancer, we're programmed to have this posture and these straight lines and turnout and all these things. And I found that I had to push myself even more to do weird movements and to let my body flow more, and to not like hit everything in the music perfectly, but just like really go inside instead of out. And it helped to do very, very small, tiny little movements. So I would hold myself almost still, and I would just sort of imagine like my organs moving and my heart moving, and just start with really small movements. And what I found is that helps most of the people that I work with. It helps them to start, whether they have a trained dancer body or they are very uncomfortable in their body. Just by starting with really small, subtle movements, it really starts to move your energy around. And that's what it all comes down to, and what it all starts with and ends with. Because when you think about this in a bigger, universal, cosmic viewpoint, we're all energy. That's what we're made up of. And that's a big part of what I've learned through this embodiment journey, is tapping into your energy and feeling your energy.
Yeah, and being honest about it. It is a process, because it's, first we have to feel what's actually occurring and not ignore it, right? And then that's a whole thing in itself. And that's why I got into this, because it was a whole thing for me. Like, I really was out of touch with my own body in a lot of ways. And then it's a whole other process to learn how to communicate that with others too, right? That's like a whole other thing. And so
Mhm.
authenticity is like this, it's quite layered in a learning process in this way, but I think at some point like it will just click, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of talk and training about communication and boundaries. And I teach those in my program. I teach communication and boundaries, but what it all starts with is just what we're talking about right now, is being embodied, feeling your own feelings and being able to communicate them. And one of the simplest ways to be able to communicate authentically with anyone in any setting, anytime, is to just start with, I feel blank,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah, we
And
talked about this before. It's like when when I felt nervous before, like if before doing this, for example, it's like I'm like or if I go on a Facebook Live or something, I'm like, I will just say right out, I'm like, I feel really nervous right now. And I will like acknowledge that publicly because it's what I do for my work too. So I think it's a good example that it's okay to say that, and it's okay to acknowledge that you're nervous. But then it's like something happens, it's like it kind of dissipates. It's like, oh, because I didn't ignore it.
yeah. And I think when we're talking about communication in relationship too, or even your relationship to the audience, the other person or people, they can sort of sense when you're not being authentic.
Yeah.
Right? If you're super nervous and you're putting on a big smile and there's something about it that just doesn't feel authentic.
Yeah.
And so when you can match your communication with your real feeling, I think it adds this whole other level of comfort, not only to yourself, but to the other person or other people
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
I think that's what a lot of people don't understand. They think, I work with women who are single a lot, and I work with women that are dating. And on a date, we have this natural inclination to be on our best behavior,
Yeah.
to hold back, to not say too much.
Yeah.
And so when people start to practice these I feel messages, it can at first it gets really scary. They don't want to do it because they feel nervous or excited, and they don't want to tell the person because they don't want to give away too much. They don't want to be judged. But once they start practicing it, all of a sudden, everything just sort of starts to align, and they realize, oh, now I feel more comfortable, and the other person feels more comfortable, and the conversation is flowing better, and the silences aren't so awkward,
Yeah.
but more comfortable.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. And
I always found that refreshing, like when I'd go on dates and a guy would just outright say like, yeah, I'm a little nervous, or he would say that. I'm like, really? Oh, that's a thing. Like it, and then it being acknowledged, it's like it would make me feel uh like I'm with a real human being, not a robot.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I used to work as a recruiter and in talent acquisition for many years. And so I've done thousands of interviews. And I find a lot of people just go on dates like they're going on an interview.
Yeah.
It's like they have this list of qualifications. Everyone has their list. He has to be this and that and this kind of job, this and all this stuff. And basically the date is like, well, tell me about your family and tell me about your education and what do you do for work? And do you have a savings account? And what is your 5-year plan? And do you want to get married? And how many kids do you want to have? And it's like, that's the absolute
Yeah.
worst thing you could possibly do
Yeah.
on the first date.
It's horrible. It's so robotic and hollow, and there's no resonance there. So this is another thing I like to talk about a lot in my work. And it's hard to explain because it's just a feeling. And so you either get it or you don't, but it's like there's a resonance to people who are more embodied and more authentic. Like you can feel that resonance. It's the same as like you can kind of think of it as like the resonance of sound, of music. Like you feel it. You can't see or even like quantify it in a way, but you feel that resonance of music. And you feel the same thing from people who are more embodied. There's a deeper resonance. And the same like with people who may be less embodied, there's maybe a more shallow resonance, you know. And again, I'm very adamant about this. Like there's no better or worse. Like it's not better to be more deeply resonant. They're just different, you know, and it's we've all gone through different phases as human beings. It's all part of the human experience. But
Yeah.
you can feel that from people.
Yeah. And even people who are deaf can feel
Yes.
music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I know that feeling. And something that just came into my mind, a thought I had when you were saying that was, can someone be too embodied or too resonant? And it immediately made me think of people I've met before who are just really intense. Like
Yeah.
they have a really intense stare and you just feel their presence. And it's not a bad thing. You know, it's something that they just have to be able to work with and navigate through, and know that some people are going to find them too much or too intense. And,
Yeah.
you know, that's
Yeah.
another thing that we all just have to be our most authentic self without worrying about being too much for someone else.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And those people might, you know, their thing might be learning how to empathize with others more, to not, you know, because there are people with very, very dominant energy, and it can be really overwhelming to for them to feel others and for the others to feel themselves. But again, it's like none of it's right or wrong necessarily, or better or worse. It's just like we all are living this human experience, and it's very dynamic and
Yeah.
wide
I think
variety.
I think when it comes to, you know, what's better and worse, I mean, I'm a very non-judgmental person. I take judgment out of almost everything. But the question that we want to ask ourselves is, how do I feel?
Mhm.
And do I love my life? Do I love my relationships? Is what I'm doing right now working for me?
Yeah.
Is everything going in the way that I want it to go? And if it's not, then maybe there is a better
Yes. Yeah.
way.
Yes, exactly. And that all comes back to what is true for you, and like trusting yourself, right? Like asking those questions to yourself authentically. And yes, in that regard, there definitely is a better and worse. Yeah.
So, what do you know about intuition? Like where it comes from or how we connect with it? It's such an amorphous, sort of strange
Yeah.
idea.
That's a
Curious about your viewpoint.
yeah, that's a big question. Again, I think a lot of I think a lot of people have a misconception about what intuition is. Like they think it's a magical thing, and some people are like it doesn't exist, or they're like it's intuition versus science. You know, it's like it's got to be either or. And I can say that intuition does exist within all of us. Like you can look at like our animal instincts, for example. Like I don't see that much of a difference between our instincts and our intuition. So both of them are based on feeling in our body, right? And when we're not feeling the signals in our body, we can't hear our intuition. We can't hear our instincts. We're just kind of trapped in the head, the overthinking mind, and totally not maybe not totally, but quite disconnected from our bodies, and therefore disconnected from the world, because our instincts is our body's way of communicating danger, threat, safety. And if you look in the animal world, they live by their instincts. They live by that feeling. And so it's different. It's layered too. It's like we can go to a very obvious example of this. It's like when I feel hungry, that's a really obvious feeling, but
You think it is, but there are also
yes.
people that aren't familiar with the feeling, people that eat out of emotional need or habit, and they lose touch with that
Yeah.
physical need. And so that's an example of the importance of embodiment too.
Yeah.
To notice your own body's needs and desires and urges, and when you're thirsty. And speaking of the animal kingdom, I find birds are such an interesting example, because we say bird brain because they have these little tiny brains, and yet they don't have GPS, and they're able to migrate thousands of miles to a specific spot that they know they need to go to at just the right time and just the right place, and with perfect precision in how they fly together with the group. And yet they're not in their heads, they're not in their brain, they're entirely almost intuition.
It is. It really is. Like I look to nature all the time for examples. Like when I can't figure something out or how to illustrate it to people, I always look to nature, because nature always has an example. And then it's a tangible example, just like the one you gave, where yeah, they just trust. They don't even trust. It's beyond trust. They just are. Their instincts, that's just what it is.
Yeah. And they have this sense, you sense the electromagnetic pulls of the earth and all of that, but we have senses that we have lost touch with.
Yeah.
Our intuition is like sixth sense, and it's something that as we practice more, we can become more able to hear it and listen to it and understand it.
Yeah.
And the understanding part is important, because a lot of people have, they're still in their heads when they think they're in their intuition. So they might be with someone that triggers them in a way that they say, oh, I have a bad intuition about this person. And sometimes, especially when someone's been through trauma or abuse or neglect, their instincts become skewed, so that it's not their actual primal nature instincts, but it's the programming that they've been through.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing to learn to discern, is what is your intuition versus what is fear, right? And that was a process for me too. But one of the things, a simple thing that helped me navigate it, that I can share right now, is that your fear is going to be a lot louder. Like your fear is going to be persistent, and it's going to be like saying this, like repeating a story. It's going to be kind of loud, feeling loud in your head, while intuition is quiet. There's not really a story attached. It's kind of, and that's why it makes it tricky, because when we're used to listening to that loud voice, it muffles out the intuition, right? But that's what we have, when that's a signal we can pay attention to. Okay, I have this really loud thing that's like, he's meant for me, like I have to make it work, like, and you're feeling super anxious about dating this guy. Like I've gone through that. And I'm like, okay, I have to make it work, and it's like underneath, I'm like, okay, actually that's probably not the true story. That's the fear talking, anxiety talking. That I can pay attention to that, and then underneath that is the truth. And that usually is a process for a lot of people to be like, what's actually true, because there's going to probably be pain, things that we've ignored, trauma, just grieving, things that we just haven't wanted to feel. So that's usually why we don't pay attention to the intuition sometimes, and we want to pay attention to that story because we want that to be true, but underneath it's like probably not.
Yeah, and there's a lot of self-protection. We have all been hurt before.
Yeah.
And there's a lot, trauma is another popular buzzword, and everyone's talking about it. And the thing about trauma is that trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is your response in your body to what happened to you.
Yeah.
And therefore, someone that went through a big trauma, someone that even went through small traumas can still have that trauma left over in their body. So even if someone looks back and says, yeah, I had a pretty good childhood. Things were pretty easy. You know, I don't have any trauma. When you really dig in, and I have had this experience working with a lot of clients that they don't understand why they're not able to, you know, find a husband and make love work. And when we start digging in, we realize that they've had these experiences that created fear. They don't want that thing to happen again. And so they create a wall of protection around themselves.
Yeah.
So if someone made fun of them for being, you know, quirky, they've built this wall of protection where they will no longer be quirky and they're a very serious person. And then what they don't realize is that being serious all the time isn't the answer either. And that has a way of holding them back. You know, your own self-protection, your own walls that you build to protect you, you end up holding yourself back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the circumstances people go through are, I don't want to say irrelevant, but like, it really just depends on how you've learned to navigate trusting yourself, you know, and the factors in that can be so widely varied, you know, very.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. Life is very dynamic. It's very colorful and changing and lots of gray area. And so many people find the world and they just try to look at it as black and white, good and evil, right and wrong. And that's not the reality of the world, is it?
Yeah, I mean, I am an artist too, so I think I shared this with you before, but it's like I look at pretty much everything on a spectrum. So like, you know, there is black and white. If you look at the color spectrum, like there's black and white on either end, but it's only at those 2 points, and it's very rare, right? Everything in between is a different shade of black and white. And that's where, again, if you look at like, put it on a line, that's where most of life is, right?
And there's more than 50 shades of gray, right?
Yes. I think, yeah. There's infinite shades. I'd like to see that one.
That's where life happens, right?
Yeah.
I tell my clients, I'm like, life happens in the gray area.
Yeah.
And, you know, foundationally, it's just, we have to be present in the moment to be able to discern what is this gray area, what is the right thing to do, you know, because it's not all black, white, right, wrong.
Yeah.
And I know one of the things that we talked about, and a lot of the women that I work with fall into this pattern of people pleasing.
Yeah.
And a lot of time people pleasing is very black and white thinking. It's like, I have to be good, I have to be nice, I have to be sweet, I have to be accommodating. And really, I mean, sometimes that's helpful, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it bothers the other person. Sometimes it causes you to deplete yourself. I mean, like you said, there's infinite shades of gray.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I add to the people pleasing?
Yes.
So I consider myself a recovering people pleaser. Just like people say in 12-step programs, I'm a recovering, you know, whatever. And something that probably is going to sting for anyone who is still in their people pleasing mode listening to this, but it's true, is that people pleasing is just as emotionally and mentally manipulative as the person who is overtly manipulating. Because you're doing all of these things to please the other person to get what you want, but you're not being honest, and you're not being real, and you're not being authentic. And when I realized that, it stung. Like, it stung my ego. I'm like, oh shit, you know, like I'm doing that. It just doesn't look as obvious, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the responsibility of the people pleaser, to stop doing that, because it's not authentic. You know, if someone's upsetting you, like, you need to, speak up, and have those, work on those boundaries. And that's I know something that you do too. It's like, it's a very important thing to get clear on, is when and how to express that,
Yes.
body your boundaries.
Yeah, I remember when I found that out about people pleasing being controlling, and I've been a people pleaser as well, recovering people pleaser,
Yeah.
and I've been in a relationship where the other person is very controlling.
Mhm.
And when I realized this about people pleasers being manipulative and controlling, at first I was like, well, no, I've been controlled and this is
I
totally
know.
different. And then I also realized, on top of everything that you just said, that when we allow somebody else to control us, we're doing that to get what we want also. We're allowing the other person to control us to get that person to like us, or to avoid conflict, or to have a peaceful outcome. And while we might think that that's productive or effective or necessary, it's really not. I mean, the basis of everything, and everything that we're talking about today, is that authenticity is what matters the most.
Mhm.
And so if someone's trying to control you, just going along with it to keep the peace is not authentic.
Mhm.
If you feel resentful, if you feel hurt, if you feel controlled, if you feel unhappy, then it's important to start with that and to say that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, this touches on much deeper issues with, relationships and trauma bonds and all of that. So I won't go too far down that rabbit hole. I will say, if anyone's in an abusive relationship, get help. You can get out. There are resources, and you can reach out to one of us too for resources or help in that, to get out and to be in a happy, healthy relationship. Because what I've learned is that so many people who just think, I'm bad at relationships, I'm just not good at this, I just have to settle, or I just have to be alone, and I'm not meant to be married, there there's absolutely hope. There's absolutely hope of getting through the limitations and the reasons why you are where you are, and being able to express yourself authentically and to have an authentic relationship.
Yeah.
And not everyone needs a relationship either. It's important to be happy on your own first.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Yeah, definitely.
100%. Yeah, that's why with any client I work with, I always start with the most important relationship in your life, which is the
Mhm.
relationship with yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
It all starts there. So awesome, Megan. Thank you so much. This was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can you tell anyone who's listening how they can find you, how they can reach you?
Yeah. So my website is meganhart.coach. So meganhart.coach, COACH. If you go to meganhart.com, it will be the romance novelist. So that's not me. And there I do have, or meganhartcoach@gmail.com is my email. And yeah, I have, if anyone is curious to chat more, I'm very open to chatting and seeing, like, if you want to work together. I have a lot of resources. Yeah.
Awesome. And you work with men, women, people in any sort of
Yeah.
situation, right?
Yeah. I work with men and women. And usually it's, I work with people, working through pretty deep trauma too. Or not, like, it's the people that usually want to work with me are just trying to either like break through some level of somewhere they've felt stuck for a long time, or also like just, yeah, making big life decisions, but like from an authentic place.
Yeah, yeah. And authenticity in relationships being the topic, it all starts with trusting yourself first, so that you can then begin to trust others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Awesome. Thank you. And I'm Whitney Kobrin. I'm a love coach for women. So I help women to love themselves, love their lives, and attract lasting love. My website is hearthunterslovecoaching.com. And on my website, you can book a free consultation with me, and I'll spend an hour with you talking about your love life and how I might be able to help you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Until next time. Thanks, Megan.